I said, Dad, I love you and you've been a wonderful father. And the last words he would ever say on earth were, I love you too.
It is Thursday, December 6th, and this is Fox and Friends First, happening right now at 4 a.m. A Fox News alert for you, a moving state funeral for a former president. The world coming together to pay tribute and celebrate the life of George H.W. Bush. We are live in Houston, where Bush 41 will be laid to rest today. And fighting for the working class, thousands of Americans trying to stop their jobs from moving to Mexico. The demands that they're making amid massive layoffs at General Motors.
My beautiful daughter is going to walk 5 miles to school in 36-degree weather.
And bullying is unacceptable. A father teaching his daughter an important life lesson, his epic punishment that is now going viral. Fox and Friends First starts right now. Let's begin with a live look in Houston at St. Martin's Episcopal Church, where today a final farewell will be given to George H.W. Bush, our 41st president. His son and former President George W. Bush delivering an emotional eulogy at his state funeral in D.C., calling his dad a great and noble man. Rick Leventhal is live for us in Houston with much more on what is to come today. It was such an emotional day yesterday. Rick, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure, Heather. The buses that are lined up behind us have been rolling in here since early yesterday evening, filled with people who want to pay their respects and are willing to wait up to 2 hours to do so, with George H.W. Bush lying in repose here inside St. Martin's Episcopal Church. They've been filing through in an orderly fashion and will continue to do so until 7 o'clock local time, 8 o'clock Eastern. The funeral for George H.W. Bush begins here in Texas at 10 o'clock this morning, with music from the Oak Ridge Boys and Reba McEntire and eulogies delivered by James Baker and George P. Bush, one of the president's many grandsons. George and Barbara Bush have been members of this church since 1959. The president arrived here in Houston yesterday aboard Air Force One, which was dubbed Special Airlift Mission 41 for the honorable mission of carrying the former president and his family to Washington, where he lay in state at the U.S. Capitol, and then, of course, had a funeral yesterday at the National Cathedral that was attended by thousands of people, including 5 current former U.S. presidents, and among them, George W., who, as you mentioned, delivered a powerful eulogy.
To us, he was close to perfect, but not totally perfect. His short game was lousy. He wasn't exactly Fred Astaire on the dance floor. The man couldn't stomach vegetables, especially broccoli. And by the way, he passed these genetic defects along to us.
After today's funeral here in Texas, Bush 41 and his family will board a special train with a locomotive painted in Air Force One colors, dubbed Locomotive 4141, to pull that train for a nearly 100-mile ride to College Station in the campus of Texas A&M. That's home to the George H.W. Bush Library, where Bush 41 will be laid to rest next to his wife, Barbara, who died in April. Today will mark the end of a several-day, what the family's calling celebration of the life of a man they say was just simply amazing, Heather.
Yeah, former Senator Alan Simpson, he was so funny, you know, some of the stories that he shared, and then that moment when President George W. Bush just choked up there at the end talking about his dad. It was really quite a service yesterday. Rick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
More to come today. But right now, how about this live look at Capitol Hill for you, where today lawmakers are moving on with business. They're expected to vote on a short-term spending bill to keep the government running for another 2 weeks. They have until tomorrow at midnight to approve the measure. Both parties are fighting over funding for President Trump's border wall and security. Today, Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen will testify before the House Judiciary Committee on immigration. Well, lawmakers also at a standstill over a bill protecting Robert Mueller from getting fired. The Senate panel forced to delay votes on President Trump's judicial picks as Jeff Flake refuses to vote until his measure makes it on the floor. Ellison Barber is live on Capitol Hill, where a new memo from Mueller is now sparking even more outrage. Good morning, Ellison.
Hi, Heather. The Senate Judiciary Committee's executive business meeting was postponed for a second week in a row, and votes on roughly 24 judiciary nominees are once again on hold as that Republican standoff continues over legislation protecting special counsel Robert Mueller. Republicans' majority on the Judiciary Committee is slim, 11-10. If one Republican senator defects, then that poses a problem when it comes to advancing nominees. Last month, Republican Senator Jeff Flake vowed to vote against the administration's judicial nominees until the Senate votes on legislation that protects special counsel Mueller and the Russia probe. When asked if the Judiciary Committee is any closer to voting on nominees, Senator Flake said this.
I don't know. I hope so. I mean, we can solve this easily. Let's just have a vote. Let's just have a vote. You can vote against it, vote for it, but it deserves a vote.
The Mueller protection bill is a bipartisan one, but a recent attempt to get it to the floor was blocked by Senator Mike Lee, who says the legislation is unconstitutional. All of this as a court filing by special counsel Mueller gets a whole lot of attention. The filing says President Donald Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn provided enough information to the special counsel's team that he should not spend time in jail. The filing says Flynn substantially cooperated with the Russia investigation. Flynn is, of course, one of 5 Trump associates to plead guilty to charges related to the special counsel's investigation. Another one is Paul Manafort. Prosecutors say Manafort violated a plea deal. His lawyers deny that. A judge said that they had until December 7th, tomorrow, to submit information related to that. A Manafort memo is expected to be made public sometime today. Heather.
All right, waiting for a lot to transpire on all of that. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're going to talk much more about it coming up. Well, President Trump has been at the center of the special counsel's investigation nearly as long as he has been in office. Fox News contributor Newt Gingrich says history will look back on the Mueller probe as an elaborate effort to undermine a duly elected president.
I think in a really sad, historians someday will comment that this was one of the most extraordinary efforts to undo the will of the American people by an established bureaucracy and its establishment friends that we've seen in all of American history. And I want to make one quick point, just to put this in context. Donald Trump, after 92% negative coverage for 2 years, 92% negative coverage for 2 years, is somewhere between 44 and 48% approval, depending on the poll. Ronald Reagan, about this point in 1983, was at 35%.
Well, since President Trump took office, the administration has hit Russia with economic sanctions for its involvement in Crimea and has threatened to pull out of the nuclear arms treaty. Also, more on that coming up a little bit later in the show. But first to this Fox News alert. A desperate search underway right now for 5 Marines after warplanes collided off the coast of Japan. 2 crew members have been rescued so far. One of them is in stable condition. The condition of the second Marine is unknown. The fighter jet and refueling plane crashed during a routine training exercise like the one seen in this photo. We will bring you more information as it continues to come in. At least 2 people are dead after a semi going the wrong way slams into a school bus packed with high school girls on a basketball team. This happened in an Illinois interstate overnight. A 72-year-old team volunteer and truck driver were killed, according to local news reports. At least 4 students injured. This is the second crash this week involving students. On Monday, a bus carrying a youth football team flipped in Arkansas, killing a 9-year-old boy. Well, President Trump is proposing to roll back Obama-era regulations on the coal industry. The EPA will announce some plans today to raise the limit for carbon emissions. That's according to the New York Times. Under the new rule, plants could emit up to 1,900 pounds of carbon dioxide. That's compared to 1,400 pounds under Obama. The move will make it easier to build new coal plants. A potential landmark Supreme Court case could impact Robert Mueller's Russia probe. Today, the High Court will review a double jeopardy loophole allowing states and the federal governments to prosecute someone for the same crime. Well, it could impact Paul Manafort, who pleaded guilty to federal charges, but potentially faces state charges if he is pardoned by President Trump. SpaceX launches its 20th rocket this year, but all does not go as planned.
3, 2, 1, 0. And liftoff.
The Dragon spacecraft lifting off without a hitch, sending supplies to the International Space Station. But the remaining equipment didn't quite stick its Earth landing, instead spiraling into the Atlantic Ocean. A SpaceX CEO, Elon Musk, says it did not appear to be damaged. Let's hope not. Well, the time now is about 11 minutes after the top of the hour, and Robert Mueller gearing up to issue sentencing memos on Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort. Why our next guest says that this is a sign the Russia probe is finally wrapping up. And a scene from Christmas Vacation comes to life. The hilariously large tree tied to the top of a van that is now going viral. Could special counsel Robert Mueller be nearing the end of his nearly 2-year investigation? A new report says his latest moves show he is tying up some loose ends and preparing his final report. So what does that mean for the president? Joining me now to discuss is the Director of Public Policy for the James Dobson Family Institute, Jenna Ellis. Jenna, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Good morning, Heather. Great to be with you.
So let's just bring this up so people can see at home and go through this, because there's a lot to get through. Let's begin with Michael Flynn. He's facing one count. He pled guilty to one count of making false statements. We now know that Mueller came out yesterday and said, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, and said that he is now recommending no jail time for him. Paul Manafort, in the D.C. case, he was facing 7 counts. He pled guilty to 2 counts, 1 count of conspiracy against the U.S. and 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct justice. Manafort, in the Virginia case, he was convicted of all 8 counts that he was facing. Michael Cohen, facing 9 counts, he pled guilty to charges of 1 count of lying to Congress. So what does all of this mean? We're also expecting these memos to come out, as they did about Flynn on Friday, possibly about Cohen and Manafort.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing for people to understand is that none of these crimes have substantively been connected at all to the Trump administration or anything that would implicate either President Trump or then candidate Trump. And so you have Michael Flynn, who pled guilty to lying as a procedural violation, nothing substantive. You have Manafort and Cohen, who pled guilty to crimes wholly unconnected to anything regarding their connection to the administration. And so the bottom line here is that the Mueller investigation has turned up absolutely nothing that would implicate Trump or would give the Democrats, when they take over the House in 2020, a legal basis to impeach the president. And so if they go that route, it's going to be wholly a political question, not a legal one.
So what about the timing of all of this? I mean, all of this coming out right now in one fell swoop. What do you think about that?
I think that's pretty typical for an investigation. It does seem like Mueller's tying up loose ends, and he's saying, you know, I'm done. I mean, so special prosecutors are governed by a specific rule of ethics that says that they have to pursue the interests of justice. What that means is that it shouldn't be a political investigation. It shouldn't depend on whether there's an R or a D after your name for the interests of justice to actually be served. And so his obligation under the law is to go where the evidence leads, and when there is no evidence, to further his investigation, to close it, and to give the American people an understanding and a trust of legitimacy in our system that he's not going to pursue politics over the law.
What about this memo? At least the memo on Flynn has been released, and we have all this redacted information. Do you think that that is somewhat intentional on Mueller's part and the special prosecutor's office to intimidate the Trump administration?
It could be, and certainly the mainstream media and the Democrats are going to spin it that way. I mean, because the investigation isn't closed yet, that's still pretty typical. But listen, cooperation just means that he's telling them what he knows, which that doesn't mean that there's anything substantive or even criminal in nature there. I mean, prosecutors and investigators talk to people all the time that say, I'm being cooperative and I'm helping you, this is what I know, which doesn't actually lead to anything. So the fact that it's redacted should not make the administration nervous in the least, because President Trump has been very clear that he's had nothing wrong in terms of his conduct as a candidate or now in his administration. So regardless of the redacted information, I don't think that that's any reason for anyone to be nervous about what that contains.
And it was Russia collusion in the investigation. It could possibly have led to maybe the Clinton campaign.
Yeah, and that's what's very interesting here is that even though, the Democrats and certainly the progressive left were very interested in the investigation ongoing, the fact remains that there are so many things that the Clinton Foundation is still being investigated for, that Hillary Clinton, her whole emails, all of those things are things that the American people want justice. Again, it shouldn't depend whether an R or a D is after your name. And so if this continues, it looks like there's much more evidence that could result in charges for the Clinton Foundation, for Hillary, than anyone connected to Trump.
Because you do not know what information these people are sharing. And we're going to talk more about that coming up. Jenna Ellis, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Heather.
Well, the time now is about 19 minutes after the top of the hour. And there's a new sheriff in town, and his first order of business, cutting off ICE, the new controversial move happening in one county. And keep the MAGA hats and resist mugs at home, where employees are now banned from talking politics. Politico that he doesn't miss his old Alabama Senate seat. That's despite speculation that he might run against Democrat Senator Doug Jones in 2020. Sessions says that he will not make a decision anytime soon. He resigned as AG last month. Well, federal employees are being warned to leave politics at home. 2 government memos clarify what's acceptable while working on taxpayers' dime. Federal employees cannot display items supporting or opposing President Trump's re-election campaign. Items prohibited Make America Great Again hats and resist mugs. The warning includes all social media activity. Well, the GM CEO being grilled for a second day today on Capitol Hill, as thousands of General Motors employees could be out of a job come March amid massive layoffs. Robert Gray here with what Ohio lawmakers are trying to do to prevent that from happening in their own backyard.
Come on, we bailed you out, gave you a tax cut, and this is how you pay us back? We deserve better.
Ohioans fighting for a chance to keep their jobs at General Motors. State senators speaking out for their working class constituents, meeting with the General Motors CEO Wednesday to discuss the future of their Lordstown factory.
We expect General Motors now to stand with this workforce and give them a chance.
Already 3,000 workers at the plant have been laid off since 2017. The remaining 1,500 worried about their jobs as GM makes plans to close 5 plants in North America. That would affect roughly 14,000 total workers. The company's CEO, Mary Barra, saying it's all part of a strategy to keep up with a changing market.
We're trying to make sure that General Motors is strong and that we're in a leadership position in the technologies.
The senators calling for GM to shift their electric vehicle production from Mexico to Ohio, saving and potentially adding more jobs at the plant. And Barra says the massive layoff decision was far from easy.
They are incredibly difficult because they impact the lives of General Motors team members.
The company says it's working with the United Auto Workers Union to explore potential relocation opportunities for those who lost their jobs. Barra told lawmakers she'll keep an open mind about the Lordstown plant, but is making no promises. In Los Angeles, Robert Gray, Fox News.
Yeah, try to keep those folks at home. We'll follow what happens today. The time now is about 5:30 the top of the hour, and in just hours from now, the stock market set to reopen after plunging nearly 800 points this week over trade fears. But now China says they're confident that they can strike a deal with the U.S., how the president is now responding. And Cheesecake Factory chaos, why the cops were called over free cheesecake.
Walking in with pile out, baby,
Market will reopen today after a roller coaster week of massive gains and losses. Chinese officials now say that they are confident about striking a trade deal with President Trump following the G20 summit. Todd Pyro joins us live with what it means for Wall Street. Lots of folks watching to see what happens today.
Seriously, Heather, trading set to resume in a few hours after all major markets closed yesterday for the National Day of Mourning to honor President Bush. Expect oil, tech, and corporate earnings to be the focus today, but with the specter of U.S.-China trade relations hanging over the market's head. Here's what China meant to the market so far this week. Take a look at Monday, higher on the heels of news that President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping had successful trade talks at the G20 over the weekend. Then Tuesday happened, lower after skepticism on how successful those trade talks really were. President Trump optimistic about the future of U.S.-China trade, tweeting very strong signals being sent by China once they returned home from their long trip, including stops from Argentina. Not to sound naive or anything, but I believe President Xi meant every word of what he said at our long and hopefully historic meeting, all subjects discussed. The Chinese Commerce Ministry saying it will implement the agreed upon plan quickly, writing, quote, "We are confident about the implementation of the consensus from the meeting. In 90 days, economic and trade teams of both sides will actively push forward the consultation following clear schedule and roadmap." So everything's good, right? Well, with that as the backdrop, we're not looking too good today. Right now, futures of the three major indices down following news of the arrest of a China tech executive accused of, in no small part, dealing with Iran despite U.S. sanctions. So, Heather, we'll see.
You know, and it totally changed because yesterday morning I thought, oh, hey, now things are going to be looking up on Thursday. But then a complete switch. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Todd.
No problem.
We're going to talk more about it coming up. Well, the UN set to vote on a resolution condemning Hamas. If adopted, it would be the first time the Assembly has taken action against the Palestinian terror group. The measure, which recently won crucial backing from the EU, condemns Hamas for firing rockets into Israel. The leader of Hamas calls it an effort to delegitimize Palestinian resistance. Well, French President Emmanuel Macron scrapping his carbon tax after weeks of protest. He originally planned to delay the tax meant to curb global warming, I should say. But Macron's latest move may not be enough. One protester encouraging protesters to keep pushing for things like a higher minimum wage. More demonstrations are scheduled for this weekend. And President Trump set to speak at two White House Hanukkah receptions today in the East Room, with all Jewish members of the House and Senate having been invited. Now, the ceremonies were initially delayed to honor President George H.W. Bush. Today marks the fifth day of Hanukkah. Russian President Vladimir Putin now threatening to build new missiles that are banned under a Cold War arms agreement if the United States pulls out of the deal. This after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo gave the Kremlin a 60-day ultimatum to comply. So is Putin setting the stage for a nuclear arms race? Here to weigh in is Executive Director of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Marion Smith. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think this is an incredibly important story that, you know, with everything else going on, is flying under the radar a little bit. Let's take a look first so people can see this at home. What exactly is the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF? It was signed by the U.S. and the USSR in 1987. It banned all nuclear and non-nuclear missiles with short, medium ranges except sea launch. Both countries were allowed to inspect the other's installations. So what is significant in terms of what President Putin is talking about right now?
Well, you know, yesterday and today we've celebrated the life and leadership of President George Herbert Walker Bush, and it's been noted that it was on his watch that the Soviet Union dissolved, that communism collapsed in Europe, and yet the context of that had begun years earlier. We saw under Gorbachev, glasnost and perestroika reforms happening in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was less brutal to its own people increasingly as the United States increased pressure, especially under President Reagan, and was less bellicose to the United States. So that was the context of the INF Treaty then. Under the Soviet Union, Mr. Gorbachev was withdrawing Russian troops from occupied countries. Today, under the regime of Vladimir Putin in Russia, we see that Russian troops are invading and occupying new countries. It's pretty clear that Russia has been violating for a number of years the substance and the text of the INF Treaty. The United States takes its treaty obligations seriously, and so we have been holding to the agreement. And so basically what we're saying is if Russia is not going to hold to the text of the agreement, we are going to take back our independence of action to protect the national security interest of the United States.
And interesting that you say that this has actually been happening for several years, and it is the Trump administration and this administration that's holding them to it and basically calling them on the carpet because President Trump is so often accused of being soft on Russia.
Well, absolutely. It is a recognition that Russia is lying. It is deploying, testing, and installing these units, which are in clear violation of the prohibitions in the treaty, the 500 to 5,500 kilometer range treaty missiles. The other thing that needs to be pointed out here is that in 1987-88, the Soviet Union was the world's other superpower and the main security challenge to the United States. Today, China is playing that role, and China is not held to any sort of limitations. They're not a signatory to this treaty or any similar treaty, and the United States also has to think about being able to meet China in this entire class of missiles.
But at the same time, we see moves being made by Russia in Ukraine, where China is active, and we also see moves being made by Russia in the Middle East. In terms of NATO, what are they saying about this?
Well, they're supporting the Trump administration's leadership here. NATO defense ministers have released a statement supporting the United States ultimatum to Russia that within 60 days they need to abide by the treaty or the United States will pull out.
All right. Well, Marion Smith, thank you so much for joining us. A very important topic, something people need to keep their eye on. Thank you. And officially ending the program in Mecklenburg County, it allowed deputies to run suspects' names through immigration databases and share that information with ICE. McFadden says the program, quote, erodes trust with our community. He says ICE will now need court-issued warrants to access jails. An appeals court upholds a New Jersey gun control law on high-capacity magazines. The law passed this year allows gun owners to hold 10 rounds of ammunition, opposed to a 15-round limit that was approved in 1990. Officials for the law hope that the limit will stop mass shooters from reloading. Well, Senator Chuck Grassley is demanding some answers about an FBI raid at the home of a Clinton whistleblower involved in Hillary Clinton's Uranium One scandal. Joining me now to talk about it is investigative reporter from the Daily Caller, Luke Rosiak. Thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.
So the FBI agents, there were 16 of them. They went to the home of this whistleblower. His name was Dennis Kane. They spent about 6 hours there at his home. Whistleblowers are supposed to be protected by the government, you know, when they hand over information, which this person did to the government. Here are some of the senator's questions. Let's bring that up to begin with. He wants to know why Kane's house was raided, Dennis Kane, the whistleblower. Did the FBI know about Kane's discovery? Are the documents considered protected? Did the FBI seize any classified information? So what do you make of all this?
Well, this is really a quadruple whammy. First, you have the implication, the indication that the Clintons violated the law in relation to their foundation and Uranium One. Second, you have the fact that the FBI apparently knew about that or had strong evidence and did not act on it. Thirdly, you have Robert Mueller was head of the FBI at the time that this occurred, which obviously suggests bias now in his current role as special counsel. And then fourth, you have the retaliation against the whistleblower. You have the cover-up of the cover-up. So the FBI really has to now make this go away because it shows that they didn't act on stuff with the Clinton Foundation before. So the DOJ Inspector General, his job is to find wrongdoing by the FBI. And this guy had given the DOJ IG evidence. And so when the FBI now raids the guy that has evidence on potential misconduct by the FBI, that's classic whistleblower retaliation. And my colleague Richard Pollack, who broke this story, he has a new one up today where people on the right and the left are saying this is a really concerning abuse of the FBI's authority, clear whistleblower retaliation.
Who sent the FBI there to the home?
Well, the FBI presumably did the raid on their own, and they haven't. The judge hasn't disclosed the warrant. So the question is, did the FBI tell the judge that they knew this guy was a whistleblower, was a protected whistleblower, or was it kind of like when they were going after Trump's guys and they misled that FISA court to get the warrant? Because this guy followed the proper procedures. He gave the information to the IG, and there's a law that protects him in situations just like this. So when the FBI knocks on his door, that's pretty concerning stuff.
So the IG being Horowitz, who had all of this information.
Correct. And then Horowitz gave it to the Senate and House Intelligence Committees as well.
So then would he still have had evidence at his home?
I believe when they knocked on his door, he said, I do have a copy, and here it is. So he was very forthright with the FBI when they showed up, and then they still searched his house. But interestingly, they didn't charge him. So why did you do the raid if you weren't going to arrest the guy? And that's just one more reason. This guy, he doesn't know what's going on. They haven't told him what's up. There's no arrest. But, you know, it really highlights Mueller's role. It reminds people that Mueller was in charge of the FBI, and there's a certain element of the special counsel probe that tends to implicate either the FBI or Trump. And so Mueller is kind of conflicted. This is a reminder that if Mueller doesn't find problems with the Trump campaign, it's basically an acknowledgement that when they were wiretapping Carter Page and when Peter Strzok was doing what he did with Hillary Clinton investigation, making that thing go away, I mean, one or the other had problems. So Mueller is part of this FBI crew, and a lot of people, they don't want to make findings against their buddies.
What if the Mueller investigation is finding problems with the Clinton campaign such that Mueller can't cover it up at this point? So he sends these FBI agents back out to this whistleblower house, and maybe now the information that's going to come forward is information that should have come forward years ago.
Absolutely, and remember, the Republicans on Capitol Hill have these documents now, as does the DOJ IG. So this is, in one sense, even though this is already such a fascinating story, this is just the first part, because we still don't know what the documents show themselves. And that's going to be really interesting to know what exactly the Clinton Foundation allegedly did, and same with Uranium One. And if we don't find that out, I think we want to know. I mean, declassify this stuff. Why aren't the Republicans on Capitol Hill telling us? Because we should ultimately know what these documents that the whistleblower has are. And so far, we haven't learned that.
Yeah, and we don't know what a lot of this redacted information is either coming out in these Mueller memos, more of which are expected to come out possibly on Friday. Luke, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Heather.
It is a lot of stuff to get through. The time now is about 15 minutes until the top of the hour, and the market set to reopen in just hours after a roller coaster week over trade fears. But futures are already painting a pretty grim picture today. Economist Peter Morici says that these trade talks may rattle investors now, but don't count on any long-term negative effects.
From New York. All right, I'm not that smart. Just saying. I'm not making that claim.
I'm not that smart either. Oh, my God.
All right, Tucker, thank you. All right, welcome to Hannity. Tonight we have major breaking news. The Hill's John Solomon tonight has just uncovered smoking gun new evidence of FISA abuse committed at the highest levels of James Comey's FBI, including a damning email chain. Coming up, we're going to show you the damning new discoveries. Also tonight, the Mueller witch hunt is apparently winding down. The mainstream media is praying hard for the bombshell that they're not getting. And in just moments, we're going to tell you everything you need to know about the special counsel's brand new report on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. They're going back to the 1700s. I'll explain. And an American hero's life was ruined over a process crime. While many top Democrats, they got away scot-free with much worse. Tonight, we'll show you some disgusting remarks from a prominent senator we were just talking about that thinks we, the people, are pretty stupid. And later, we'll bring you the latest chapter in the war on Christmas. Get this, featuring a far-left pastor putting the baby Jesus in a cage to protest President Trump. Unbelievable. And we'll play a powerful tribute to President George Herbert Walker Bush. Stay tuned. We begin with our breaking news opening monologue. All right, little thing about me. I grew up in a house, 50 by 100 lot, surrounded by law enforcement everywhere. My mom was a prison guard for 25 years. My father, he was a family court probation officer. Many, many cousins were on the New York Police Department. And my two relatives that made it to the FBI, they were considered deity. Not kidding. But tonight, I'm shocked and frankly saddened by what is corruption and abuse of power at the very top of America's most trusted institutions. Now, breaking tonight, The Hill's John Solomon has just dropped yet another bombshell on James Comey's FBI. And according to The Hill and his report, newly unearthed emails show that top DOJ FBI officials that they engaged in a willful and organized effort to defraud a FISA court judge prior to the 2016 election. Now, we've talked about this, but we never had these emails. This all surrounds the FISA warrant application and the subsequent renewal applications of Trump campaign associate Carter Page. Now, according to those newly uncovered emails, we now know the basis for this warrant was the Clinton bought and paid for dirty dossier. Remember, the bulk of evidence. Now, James Comey, along with other top DOJ officials and FBI officials, they knew that the evidence presented in the dossier was shady at best. This is what Solomon has uncovered tonight. The email exchanges show that the FBI were aware before they secured the now infamous warrant that there were intelligence community concerns about the reliability of the main evidence used to support it, that being the Hillary Clinton, Christopher Steele Russian dossier. And according to Solomon, the FBI was fully aware that Steele was, quote, had contacts with news media reporters before the FISA warrant was even secured. Now, remember, the FBI attempted to bolster its FISA application. Remember, they used what we call circular reporting, Yahoo News. And by the way, they knew the source was Christopher Steele. So it's all really just one source, but they like to create the impression for the court that there's multiple sources. No, that's circular reporting. So to recap, the FBI under President Obama, they got a warrant to spy on Trump campaign associate Carter Page at the height of the 2016 election. In order to achieve this feat, well, they had presented the FISA court judge with evidence that we now know that the FBI knew was sketchy and knew was not verified. And they themselves had doubts about it ever being true. Now, they knew the evidence was bought and paid for, too, by Hillary Clinton. That was withheld from the FISA court judges. And the evidence was bolstered with the circular media reporting that the FBI knew Christopher Steele was behind. But as we now know, that's not how so-called evidence was presented to the FISA court. So tonight, the smoking gun evidence that the FBI, under James Comey's leadership, committed a complete and total fraud on the FISA courts by presenting the court Hillary's bought and paid Russian dossier as real intelligence, and they hid the fact that the other evidence was nothing more than circular reporting. They knew it all. The email chain shows it all. Now, the evidence shows a serious miscarriage of justice, a serious abuse of power. It should shock every American, especially in light of yesterday's news. And this Friday, James Comey will testify before the House Judiciary Committee. Hopefully, he will be held accountable. Now, we did reach out to the FBI and James Comey for comment. We've yet to receive a response. John Solomon will join us with more on this devastating new report in a minute. But first, we do turn to the mainstream media's obsession of the week, once again featuring Robert Mueller's partisan witch hunt. And thanks to the latest special counsel memo on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, well, many in the press are yet again predicting an end to the Trump presidency. This is going on for 2 years. Hasn't happened yet. Take a look.
I'm going to tell you one thing I take away. There's about a size 16 shoe going to drop here.
My takeaway was that Bob Mueller and his people have a substantial case going here.
Anyone who's in Flynn's orbit, either before the election, during the transition, and those few weeks that Flynn is the national security advisor, is worried.
If you're in Trump land tonight and these documents come down, how do you feel?
I'm wigging out.
The fact that he is saying senior government leaders should be held to the highest standards, I would be a little nervous if I were the people involved in the obstruction of justice investigation, starting, of course, with the President of the United States.
All right, despite the hysteria, predictable hysteria you just saw, the latest Mueller memo does not contain any Watergate-like revelations, not even close. Here are the facts. The Mueller memo makes references to Lieutenant General Flynn violating, and you got to pay. This is how deep they had to dig here. Violating the Logan Act. The Logan Act is an archaic law that was passed, get this, in 1799, and it was only responsible for 2 indictments in the 1800s. Now, he was also allegedly being investigated for violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA as it's called, which was used only 7 times since it became law in 1966. This is how, it's all in that memo that we had last night. This is how desperate and how pathetic Robert Mueller is. Now remember, Lieutenant General Flynn was first a victim of a crime himself, because they knew nothing about General Flynn except that they illegally surveilled him, illegally amassed him. They put aside the, what we now call, you're supposed to do mitigating. They're supposed to literally, once you hear an American's on the line, you are not supposed to identify them. And then raw intelligence on General Flynn was leaked. And that illegally leaked information was then used against him by Team Mueller. And Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, well, he pled guilty to a process crime. That's true. They can't get him on any other underlying crimes about collusion with Russia. And lying to Mueller's investigators, where neither Comey didn't think he lied, McCabe didn't think he lied, and Peter Strzok